It was late afternoon. The atmosphere seemed calm inside a smartphone store. 4 employees were gathered in a room waiting for customers. Everything appeared normal until danger walked through the door. A man wearing a helmet entered. Steady steps, fixed gaze, suspicious attitude. Without saying a word, he drew a gun. He pointed it at the employees and announced the robbery. The mood changed instantly. Tension, fear. But what the criminal didn't know was that among the employees stood a police officer. The officer stayed calm, quietly drew his weapon, and reacted. Gunshots. The bandit panicked, tried to escape, but fell to the ground with no chance to fight back. The officer acted quickly and prevented a tragedy. No one was hurt, and the criminal was detained right there. Another action that proves those who choose the path of crime always face the response of justice.
Security cameras captured yet another attempted robbery. It was just past midnight when a couple arrived home in a rideshare car. As they prepared to enter the house, 2 motorcycles appeared on the street. The criminals approached quickly. One pulled a gun and announced the robbery, while the other provided cover. A pedestrian walking nearby noticed the action and ran to safety. But what the robber didn't know was that the woman in the couple was a police officer. The moment she realized the threat, she reacted. Gunshots followed. The criminals fled at high speed. The driver, terrified, sped away to get out of the line of fire. Hours later, one of the robbers showed up at a local hospital with a gunshot wound and was arrested. His accomplice remains on the run. The officer was unharmed. Another case where courage and preparation prevented a tragedy.
A motorcycle with 2 criminals intercepts another on a quiet street. The victim is forced to stop. One of the attackers gets off the bike, armed, but makes a fatal mistake. The man in front of him is a police officer. Even with the gun pointed at him, the officer reacts with precision. Shots are fired. The criminal runs, his accomplice escapes, and nothing is stolen. The officer walks away unharmed. It was late at night. An empty street. A man sat on his motorcycle waiting for something. Suddenly, a woman appeared. She walked along the sidewalk, crossed the street, and spoke with the rider. But within seconds, everything changed. Both turned their heads and noticed something strange. A criminal emerged in the middle of the street, gun already drawn. He announced the robbery. The man quickly got off the motorcycle, threw himself to the ground, and the bike fell beside him. The assailant moved closer, aimed his weapon, and threatened the victims. The woman panicked. Moments later, an accomplice appeared. He crossed the street, lifted the fallen motorcycle, and prepared to flee. But suddenly, a black van appeared. At that moment, the criminals were distracted. And that's when luck turned. A police officer passing by noticed the robbery and took action. Gunshots. One of the criminals was hit and fell to the ground. The other fled down a side street. The officer secured the scene and prevented something worse. The victims were unharmed. Nothing was stolen. Thanks to the officer's quick reaction, what could have ended in tragedy ended with justice.
It was night. Everything seemed calm on a quiet residential street. A police officer was returning home after another long day of work. He opened the garage gate, parked his car, and believed he was safe. But within seconds, everything changed. 2 criminals appeared. One lifted the gate, while the other crawled underneath and advanced toward the vehicle. The officer, alert, noticed the movement. He stayed calm. He watched every step the intruders took. One of the robbers approached, opened the car door, and announced the robbery. but he had no idea who he was dealing with. Standing before him was a trained police officer. The agent reacted instantly. Gunshots. The criminal was hit, tried to escape, leaned against the wall, and ran toward the gate. The accomplice, seeing the scene, fled in panic, leaving his partner behind. The officer came out unharmed. Nothing was stolen. Once again, training and courage made the difference. He messed with the wrong man. A police officer ready for combat made justice prevail.
It was early afternoon. A man wearing a helmet approached a black car. At first, nothing seemed unusual, but then he changed his pace, looked around, and tried to open the door. Moments later, he pulled out a gun and announced the robbery. He pointed the weapon at the window, threatening the driver and ordering him to get out. What he didn't know was that the driver was a police officer. The officer stayed calm, lowered the window, and reacted. Gunshots. The criminal was hit and fell to the ground with no chance to fight back. The officer stepped out of the vehicle, retrieved the weapon, and secured the scene. He was unharmed. Nothing was stolen. The assailant didn't survive his injuries. Another clear reminder that those who choose the path of crime always end up caught by justice.
It was late afternoon. Two criminals were walking down the sidewalk, looking for a victim. Quick glances, hurried steps. Suddenly, a motorcycle appeared at the corner of the street. The rider approached, unaware of what was about to happen. The duo stepped into the middle of the road. They stopped in front of the motorcycle and announced the robbery. The motorcyclist got off without reacting. The robbers climbed onto the bike and tried to flee. But what they didn't know was that a police officer was watching everything from a distance. Alert, the officer reacted at the right moment. He drew his weapon and gave the order to surrender. The criminals were startled. They stopped the motorcycle. The rider was taken down and detained. The other jumped off and ran, abandoning his partner. The officer acted quickly and prevented the robbery. The motorcycle was recovered. One suspect was arrested. The other remains on the run. Another precise and courageous action proving that while crime lurks on the streets, the police remain alert, always ready to respond.
It was mid-afternoon. The scene looked normal at a gas station. A Porsche pulled up onto the curb to fill the tank. Moments later, a motorcycle appeared. On it, a man. The criminal. He pretended to keep going straight, but suddenly changed direction. He rode up onto the sidewalk, got off the bike, and walked toward the car. Gun in hand, he announced the robbery. The victim, calm, stepped out of the vehicle with his hands raised. He handed over cards and cell phones. Everything happened quickly, without resistance. The robber returned to his motorcycle, showing no interest in taking the car. It seemed he would get away. But what he didn't know was that the victim was a police officer. The officer drew his weapon, reacted. The criminal sped off, fleeing at high speed. The officer ran after him, trying to stop the escape, but the bandit managed to get away. No one was injured, and now the images help police in the search for the fugitive. Another clear example that shows crime can strike anywhere, but justice never sleeps.
It was around 5 in the morning. The city was just waking up. A car sat in the garage, ready to leave. Everything seemed calm. At the corner of the street, 3 men appeared, walking casually. At first glance, nothing seemed unusual. But those men were not ordinary pedestrians. They were criminals, searching for their next victim. They approached the vehicle, watched closely, and announced the robbery. But what they didn't know was that inside the car was a police officer. The officer noticed the movement, reacted at the right moment.
Surprised, the three criminals ran off in panic down the street. The action was quick. The officer was unharmed. Nothing was stolen. Once again, training and courage made the difference. Three criminals on the run, and a police officer ready to act.
Security cameras captured another attempted robbery on a quiet street. A man, who at first looked like just another pedestrian, suddenly pulled out a weapon and confronted the driver of a parked car. He tried to force the door, hit the window, and made threats. The driver, trying to avoid damage, opened the door, but to the criminal's surprise, the victim was actually an off-duty police officer. The agent reacted instantly, and the suspect, even injured, fled on foot. Hours later, the outcome. While seeking medical attention, the suspect was arrested. Another clear reminder that crime never pays.